Tim? Where's the camera? Oh, right over there. Welcome. There's a camera there and a camera here, and I have no idea. Welcome to all of those of you that are joining us streaming. Let me give you a quick report what happened last night. I was supposed to go on air last night at 8 o'clock, right? I got sick. And by the time 8 o'clock rolled around, I didn't have enough strength to punch my way out of a wet paper bag. So Debbie helped me write a notice on Facebook that says, I will see you tomorrow night, no sense doing it twice. Well, that was a lame excuse, okay? But I feel much more gooder now. I'm okay. And so here we are. We're in Jason and Stacy's studio. What town are we in?
Taylor.
Taylor. We're in the town of Taylor. And coming to you live. And those of you that are at home watching on Facebook, at least I hope you're there.
I checked it. We're good.
Well, okay. All right. There's about 50 people sitting. Can they see him? Tim, can they see the audience?
Somebody's head showing up somewhere.
Okay. There's about 50 people here. And what you cannot see are the two guys that are making all of this happen. There's Tim. Stand up, Tim, or wave. And there's Tyler, Jason's son. Okay? These two handsome young men are making all of the technical stuff happen tonight. And I said this for the audience that's here, but my wife is here. Debbie is right over here. Jason's wife, Stacy, is back there in the back. Wave, but the camera can't see you, Stacy. It's okay. And we're just happy to be here with you tonight. I had a couple of things I wanted to say, and then I'm going to introduce Jason. I have to put my... You want to know what's a red letter day? Sure. When you have to go to the next power in your reading glasses, because you... I just had to graduate to the next... I had to jump 2 levels up on my reading glasses just this morning. It's not a happy day. Okay? I wanted to do a quick report. I didn't realize what I was doing. But last night when I sent that notice that we'd be doing this tonight, I put a picture up on Facebook. Well, it caused a bit of a stir. It was a picture. Last Friday morning, I joined a roundup, a cattle roundup down in Canaraville. And on Saturday morning, Friday morning we did the roundup, and on Saturday morning we drove 100 head back up into the mountains above Zion's National Park. It's the first time in I don't know how many years I've been able to sit astride a horse and get some productive work done. I feel like I died and gone to heaven. My backside from the legs down did die. But I had an absolute blast. And so if any members of the Rawson family are watching tonight, thank you for a wonderful heavenly experience. Winston Churchill said it best. There's something about the outside of a horse that's good for the inside of a man. So that's where I've been the last few days, and that's why the picture. And again, thank you to all the VIPs, those of you that are in attendance here, those of you that are watching at home. And I will tell you more, those of you that are at home later on, why I'm so grateful for the VIPs. Now, Jason and I would like to mention the tours. While we've got you here, you're a captive audience. You can't get away. The door's locked, and Stacy's blocking the doorway. I want to mention about the tours. There's some fun one-day tours coming up. Jason, why don't you explain a little bit?
Well, one of the things that, Glenn's done a lot of worldwide, you go all over the place, but you've never done a tour local here.
In my own backyard.
In your own backyard. And the more, who knows Salt Lake and all these trail stories better than Glenn? And so we pitched the idea, like, what about trying to do one in Salt Lake? And then he gets all excited and says, well, I could go up into Mosquito Springs, which is Hooper, right?
Yep.
And then north. I vouch for Taylor having more mosquitoes than Hooper, though. Yeah. Because I've lived in both now. But we're doing a tour in September where we're going to kind of start just down the road here at a park. We'll pick everybody up, and then you're going to jump around several places on the way up to Cache Valley, and then you're looping all the way back around at Martin Harris's grave.
Yeah, Clarkston and Martin Harris.
Brigham City, just kind of one of those really unique nobody else has done this, and so we're getting a bus to do that one. We've got, I think, about 20 seats or so still available. And I think everybody's so much in the summer mindset that they aren't thinking about that yet. So that will be a neat one. And then we're doing one in Utah County. Well, kind of
There'll be one in Utah County, all the way down through the south end of Salt Lake Valley into Utah County and back up. And then on September 30th, I've said this before, but evidently nobody was listening. Everybody thinks that because it's Salt Lake, they know all the history in Salt Lake. No, you don't. I mean, of all the cemeteries in the world that you would want to be in on the morning of the first resurrection, the Salt Lake City Cemetery is the place to be. I know him. Hang out. We're going to do a tour not only through Salt Lake City in the downtown area, but we'll go up into the Salt Lake Cemetery and show you the who's who of who's buried up there. And we wouldn't even get a tenth of the people that you know. So on September 30th, we'll do a one-day tour of the Salt Lake Valley. And we'll make it as cheaply done as we possibly, is that the right word?
Well, it's going to be high value.
Inexpensive.
Well, and the reason, so as we're doing these tours, if anybody's rented a bus lately, you know how many thousands of dollars that costs, and gas hasn't done any favor on that price either. But what was happening, we were trying to do this tour originally with a bus of 50 people, and so it ended up being like $200 a head for the day to just get on the bus, and that was if we hit enough people to even make it worthwhile. And so we weren't doing that with the numbers, and so we just said, well, what if we just had people carpool? We'll all meet, this is the place, and we'll all make friends. And you went and parked under the conference center anyway.
Yeah,
it was better.
and Carrie was with me on that tour. If you have any questions, if you think I'm overblowing it, talk to Carrie afterwards. We carpooled, and that turned out to be a wonderful experience because can you imagine taking a 50-foot bus through the cemetery? There was no way that was going to work, but we carpooled and we had way more fun. And we ended the night at Chuckarama. Okay? So there's a bunch of these one-day tours coming up, and you are invited. I would love to have you come. Very inexpensive, a lot of value, and history you think you know, but there's some things you would learn along the way.
Well, you didn't mention, so we've got a 3-day tour as well, 2 of them. You're doing the fall colors, and which we were worried people weren't going to want to go see fall colors and go up through Idaho, but that one we got rave reviews on. And then we also did we've got a St. George one in September as well, where it's just you're going to go down to St. George and loop back through Manti.
Yeah, up through the Sand Peak.
All over the place with
Highway 89. Was anybody here on that St. George thing a couple of years ago? Oh, you weren't, but you're going to be. Okay, all right. So yeah, there's a lot of things coming up on the tours that I would love to, you're invited. I'd love to have you come. I don't want to beat that horse to death anymore. Let's see. Jason, why don't you explain why we're doing this concert thing, how we got started? It's your turn to tell the story.
I can't remember how many years ago it was now, though.
It doesn't matter. We're both getting old.
So 10-ish, no, it was probably even more than that. 10, 12 years ago maybe. So Glenn had been telling stories, and I've been playing piano for years and years, back since I was in kindergarten, so I guess I'm coming up on a lot of years now. But I published some piano books, and people seemed to like them, and so I did more books and more books and more books. And I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of really talented people who make my music sound much better than I even can play it. And we ended up in Brigham City, and Glenn was supposed to do a fireside, and I was just supposed to play some piano and do a musical number, I guess, was kind of what they'd asked. But they really didn't know what they wanted us to do. But the 2 of us were 30 minutes early before it was supposed to start, and we said, well, and Glenn had used some of my music on his weekly stories. And so he knew I'd given you, 50 plus songs to use. Mm-hmm. And we were saying, well, what if we just like live on the fly had you score his stories? And I didn't even, so we were just had this like crazy idea. And then we also had a painter, which was awesome.
Kelly Donovan, who lives up in Corinne, just up the road a ways.
You want to be entertained, watch somebody, listen to Glenn's stories with some music with Kelly Donovan painting some crazy, amazing picture in an hour.
Yeah, he starts off with a bare canvas, and by the end of the fireside, I think he painted the first vision.
The only bad part is I'm behind the piano and I can't see the painting until he turns it around for the reveal, and everybody's like, oh, look at that. you got to look a little bit. I didn't.
Well, yeah, I got to look because the whole audience is watching Kelly, and they forgot I'm even there, and I'm at the pulpit.
So we ended up, and it kind of was a little bit scary going in. So I didn't know what story he was going to tell, whether it was going to be a soft story, scary story.
When I would start or when I would end.
And it was like doing the live theater like they did with the organs back in, before I was born. And you never know when he's going to finish it up because you don't even follow your script that you gave me.
Nope. Nope.
Anyway, it was just fun, and it turned out okay. And we've done several of them, and
several of them live, some of them broadcast.
Yeah, and we've not had a train wreck too bad yet. So this really is live. And I have no idea. You haven't told me any story. I'm assuming it's like.
And he hasn't told me what songs he wants to do. So we're making this up as we go. And so far, it's worked out all right.
But I think what's fun is it was about 4 years ago, we started out with this idea to do stories and share them every week. And the VIPs have really made all the difference in that happening. But it's the stories are reaching tens of thousands of people around the world. It's not just U.S. I think we're shipping to like 20 or 30 countries, which is really expensive, we found out. So, but it's awesome that we get to share it. Philippines is our number 2 place behind the United States now for people listening to your podcast. You didn't even know that.
I didn't know that, no.
So Canada got edged out the other day. So we got to do better up there. Canada's not happy about that. No.
Wow, you talk about timing. That was good. If you're wondering what's going on at home, just as he said that, the thunder just rumbled outside the room here.
I just left Canada like a few days ago. My mom's from Canada. So maybe I told a lie. I don't know. I'm going to have to check the stats.
Yeah, you better quit while you're ahead. No more lightning strikes close. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started with Nate? Do you have any questions? Well, I know you at home you can't, but anybody in the audience have a question before we jump into this and go? Are you all right?
Dinner was good.
The hard part about it now. Oh, and we had, yes.
Dinner was amazing.
In fact, Stacy, is John still out there? Would you have John come in? John and Wendy?
That was the best cobbler I think I've ever had.
Yeah, John Wabel and his wife Wendy cooked us a Dutch oven dinner tonight. And we ate so much that they're likely to be asleep before Jason and I get done tonight.
We actually moved people out of the camera because we were worried a couple of heads would start nodding and they'd have it on.
Oh, there they are. Thank you. If you want to have a great Dutch oven dinner, those of you at home, hook up with John and Wendy Wabel and Old West Dutch Oven Cooking. Okay? Catering.
I'll leave some business cards.
All right. Is it raining out there? Yeah.
I
All
hope
right.
nobody left your windows open.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Okay, now that you've heard from Jason and me, why don't we go ahead and get started with the fireside, and those of you that are at home, I think that's fitting on Pioneer Day that we get a microburst right here. So, yeah. All right. Let me begin not with the story, but with Pioneer Day in general. Wow.
What kind of car is it?
A blue Toyota right outside the door here. Your windows are down.
It's not Callie's car.
Oh, it's okay. It's Tyler's car.
No, go get it. He owes me money on that car.
Anyway, what I started to say was because of the overwhelming support we've had tonight, we will do this again. Jason and I have done it on air with no audience, and we broadcast these kinds of things before. We will do more of this kind of thing at significant times of the year and invite more of you to come. So we'll do this again. You ready?
Yeah, and like we said earlier, the VIPs were the only ones that even got the invite to this, and it sold out. Like, we're 4 over what I even planned on having, so we squeezed everybody in. Is your car okay?
That was 50 feet down the driveway.
Like 10.
Okay. Sister Campbell, what happened? All right, oh boy. I told you there was no script for this tonight. All right, Pioneer Day. I love pioneers. Ever since I came into the church, I had heard stories, and I'm a convert, and so I heard stories about pioneers and how wonderful they were. I heard stories about sacrifice on the trail, and for the longest time, I thought it was radically overblown. And then 10 years ago, actually 2008, I started working on the prophet Joseph Smith. And that was my first introduction to our pioneer heritage. And then 2010, I dove feet first into the Pioneer Trail. And the deeper I went, and 2010 to now, that's all I've done is pioneers in the Pioneer Trail. And my friends, I am here to tell you, everything you have heard about their courage, their faith, their sacrifices, it's all true. We are what we are because they were who they were, to quote a friend recently. I cannot say enough about what they were and what they did. And you know, the interesting thing about it is they didn't think they were all that. They were just doing their duty. And that's what makes this story of their heritage so wonderful, is they were common, ordinary saints just doing what the prophets of God had asked them to do. And because they did their duty, they made history. And we become what we are. We have the heritage we do. We inherit the legacy that we have because they did extraordinary things, and they were just ordinary people. So I would like to tell you the origin of that pioneer story. I was listening to something just yesterday about why the pioneers came and why they crossed the trail. And Debbie and I were listening, and at one point I said, no, that's not right. That's not the whole story. For example, this young woman right here, her name was Emily Hill. She was from England. Some of you have heard me talk about Emily before, but Emily was extraordinary. When she was an 11-year-old girl, a cousin came to visit, all hyped up and excited about the new church. Again, this is in England. And invited Emily's family to come and listen to the missionaries. And the whole family said, no, I don't want to go. 5 miles is too far to walk to any church for any service. And one of the family members said, send Emily. She'll go and she'll tell us all about it. So Emily and her cousin went off to join a Latter-day Saint meeting. And as soon as Emily heard, she came back and said, I have found the true church. I want to be baptized. And her family said, nope. And Emily said, yep. And the family said, nope, and they were bigger. They locked her in her room, and she was virtually under house arrest for the next 4 years. Emily was a very unusual girl. Her favorite book of scripture was Isaiah. How many teenagers do you know that love Isaiah? Nope. But the reason for that will become evident later on, because Emily loved poetry and Isaiah was the poet prophet. Well, Emily finally, her sister Julia joins the church, and Emily somehow sneaks out of the house and she joins the church. And then when Emily, I don't remember their ages, but Emily is still a teenager, and she is determined to come to Zion. Your ancestors, yours and mine, joined the church from all over the world, different parts of the world, even in Australia, in Scandinavia, all across the British Isles. And as soon as they did, the call of the prophets was, come, we need you to build up Zion. And those people were filled with the spirit of the gathering. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. Today, we join the church and we're filled with the spirit of Elijah, seeking out our dead and doing temple work. But 150 years ago, our ancestors were filled with the spirit of the gathering. They had to come here. And they were so driven by that, they called it the fires of faith drove them. Emily and her sister Julia snuck out of the house and went down to Liverpool and boarded a ship for America. The ship, actually, the Horizon, May 1856. They landed in Boston, and they traveled by rail from Boston to Iowa City. And in late July 1856, Emily and Julia were assigned, two single girls. I think Julia was 21 now. Emily might have been 16 to 18. They were assigned to the Willie Handcart Company. And they left Iowa City like the 18th of July, 1856. Now, brothers and sisters, have you ever been to Iowa in July? It's a whole different kind of hot. Temperatures will range anywhere from 90 to 100 degrees. That was my mission field, I know. And it's not just hot, it's humid. And can you imagine pulling a fully loaded handcart across a dusty open trail in that kind of heat? They hadn't gone very far down the road when Emily describes this scene, that she is still standing, weeping. Her feet are bloody and sore, and she's saying to herself, we're only 10 miles from the campground, and I've got another 1,300 to go. I can't do it. And her sister Julia is lying on the side of the trail crying. She can't even get up. And yet somehow, Emily and Julia, Emily said, I nerved up. And I said, I'm going to go forward, putting one foot in front of the other until either I die or I'm in Salt Lake. And somehow, they made it. That's not the end of the story for Emily and Julia. Sunday, October 19th, 1856, between the 5th and 6th crossing of the Sweetwater, west of what is today modern Martin's Cove, snow struck the Willie Company. And it didn't come down like snow in Utah. This is snow in Wyoming. It comes this way at 60 miles an hour. And they had no food, not enough clothing. They had nothing to support themselves. There was no chance of the Willie Company surviving. Advanced writers, Joseph A. Young, Cyrus Wheelock, and others, found them, met them, and as Joseph A. said, get up, keep moving, the rescue wagons are just up ahead. As he was riding out of camp, Joseph A. looked down, and there was Emily in the snow. And Emily records that he just started to cry. And Emily said, "Brother Young, why do you cry?" And he says, "Because you look so starved and so hungry, and those wagons are so far ahead." He reached in his pocket and said, "This is all I have to give you." And he handed her an onion. She took the onion, pocketed it, and kept marching. Later on, around the fire, that night, Emily saw a man who appeared to be dying. She gave the onion to him. And according to that man, that onion saved his life until rescue wagons came. Emily and Julia would both make it on to the Salt Lake Valley. And some of you have heard me talk about this. Julia married very well. Emily married a man named William Mills, a convert from England. She had one little baby, and after the baby was about a year old, Mills came and announced that he was going on a mission. He was going back to England as a missionary. Brigham Young had given him permission to go. Mills returned to England. He basically said to Emily, "Take care of yourself. I'll see you when I get back." And Mills went to England, left Emily, and when he got to England, he left the church. Wrote a letter back and said, "I never want to see you or the church or Salt Lake ever again." Emily would later write, "Of all that I endured on the trail, suffering and privation and difficulty, it was nothing compared to being abandoned by the one in whom I had loved and placed my trust." At that low time, the Civil War was breaking out. The economy was bad. Emily was cast out of her home. She was thrown out on the street. This is now 1861. And one night, and I can understand this, one night in the very depths of despair, nowhere to go, no one to help her, no one to turn to, Emily knelt down to pray, and the Spirit of the Lord whispered to her, "Trust in thyself and in the Lord." And as some of you will understand, Emily took out paper and a pencil and started to write. And that night, Zion's poetess was born. Emily would go on, along with Eliza R. Snow, to become the great poetess of Zion. She would later get married again and raise a very large family. Emily would go on to become an outspoken advocate for women's rights, advocating women having the right to vote. Not only that, she'd become a successful businesswoman, a real estate broker, and a cattle rancher. Good on her. Emily would go on to change her world. Now, most of you don't know her by her name, Emily Hill Mills Woodmansee. But every sister here recognizes one of her poems. As sisters in Zion, we'll all work together. Now, my friends, that's the Pioneer Trail. That's the kind of spirit. They came from the other side of the world. They left home and family and security. They left a heritage behind and adopted something altogether new. You and I have not had to do that. But imagine turning your world upside down and going to Utah in the 1850s, and it did not look like it does now. And there wasn't a 7-Eleven on every corner and a Walmart around the block. You were carving a civilization out of the wilderness, and you paid your way to come. That's pioneers. That's pioneers. Now, there's more to the story than that. You okay?
Sure.
See what I mean?
I have no idea.
How
what
does
he's
he
gonna
do
tell me.
this? He just sort of goes right into the song. It's so cool. This story, this next story is brand new. I just finished the research on this a week ago. And I've never told it before, so I'm going to have to read portions of it because I don't have the story completely memorized. But this story here embodies the grit of those pioneers. Now, I'm sorry, I don't want to sound judgmental, but we are a pampered, spoiled, and soft lot in the 21st century. If somebody said we had to walk a mile to church, that might be too far for most of us. But listen to this. Again, I'm going to have to quote parts of this. Joseph Angel Young was born in 1834 in Kirtland, Ohio, the oldest son of Brigham Young and Mary Ann Angel. Joseph A., they called him. In 1852, Joseph got married. And right after that, he was called on a mission to the British Isles. And this was like 1854, he's called to leave. So he's 2 years or less into his marriage, and he goes on a mission to England, where he would labor for the next 2 years. Now, he comes home in the fall of 1856 and gets as far as the Missouri River, where he helped with the immigration that year, 1856. That was the first year of the handcart migration, and Joseph A. is one of the returning missionaries helping to organize all of that. And it was a lot of work. Well, he does all of that. He gets all of the handcart companies out on the plains, and he finally arrives home in the Salt Lake Valley on the 4th of October, 1856, and reports to his father, Brigham Young. The next morning, October 5th, his dad, Brigham Young, stands at the pulpit for the beginning of General Conference, and with raised voice and heightened emotion, Brigham pounds the pulpit and says, "I wish for the voice of 7 thunders." Because he said, there are more than 1,000 of our people still out on the plains. Bring them in. Go get them. I need teams, I need wagons, I need food, clothing, supplies, everything to sustain life. Give it to me. Donate. Save these people's lives. Joseph A. had been home 2 days and away from his bride and his family. And October 7th, 3 days after his arrival in the valley, he turns around and goes back out onto the plains, along with Brother Allred's ancestor, Reddick Newton Allred, and about 25 or 30 others went back out onto the plains after being gone that long. Now, they were told that they would find the handcart immigrants at Fort Bridger. They reached Fort Bridger. They were not there. Well, surely they can't be any further than Green River. They reached the Green River crossing. They're not there. Well, they can't be any further than South Pass. And yet they go up and over South Pass and still no sign of the immigrants. And this is not, no cell phone, no communication. Where are they? Literally, where are they? And if you think Wyoming is desolate and empty now, imagine what it would have looked like in 1856. And finally, Captain Grant said, we can't take this group any further if we don't know where they are. So he asks 4 men to ride on up ahead and try to find those companies. Cyrus Wheelock, Stephen W. Taylor, Joseph A. Young and one other man, I can't remember his name, and they ride on up ahead while Captain Grant makes camp at a place called Rock Creek Hollow. They ride, and later on that day, they find them at the 5th crossing. And I told you that story about Joseph A. and the Onion and Emily Hill. And Joseph A. gets the Willie Company up and says, keep going, up over Rocky Ridge, keep going. And then Joseph A. and the other riders keep going east now, looking for the Martin Company. There's still more than 1,000 people east of them on the trail. But where in the world are they? But Joseph A. doesn't go back and tell Captain Grant. And the Willie Company moves on up ahead and camps at the 6th crossing of the Sweetwater. Come with me on one of these tours, and I'll show you right where they were. And that's the day when Captain Willie makes this heroic, incredible ride up over Rocky Ridge and finds them. But Joseph A., meanwhile, works his way all the way to Devil's Gate, and still no sign of 1,000 immigrants out here in the middle of nowhere. And by now, it is a frigid, snowbound wilderness, snow ranging anywhere from a few inches to 1.5 feet deep. The wind is still blowing, and the temperatures are sub-zero. And finally, Captain Grant catches up to Joseph A. and the riders at Devil's Gate. And he waits, and still no sign. And finally, Captain Grant said to Joseph A., take 2 men, Abel Gar and Dan Jones, and Joseph A. again. And he said, ride east, and don't come back until you find him. I don't care if you have to ride all the way to the Missouri. Find him, and don't come back without him. Brothers and sisters, being out in a snowstorm is one thing. Being out in a snowstorm on horseback, that's a whole nother level of cold. Joseph A. and the other 2 men finally find the Martin Company and the Hunt Wagon Company. They find him at the last crossing of the Platte near Bessimer's Bend, Red Butte's camp. And then they say to him, get up. If you sit, you die. Keep moving. It's your only chance. And so the Martin Company and the Hunt Company get up, and they start moving east. And Joseph A. rides even further on and finds the last wagon company, the Hodgett Company, up near the last crossing, another 10 miles down the river. And then he turns around along with the other 2 rescue riders and rides all the way back and catches up with the Martin Company going up Avenue Hill, struggling, slipping, sliding, falling down in the mud and the snow, trying to pull their hand carts. And Dan Jones says, we took out our lariats, hooked them onto the carts, and with our horses pulled the carts to the top. And he said, we camped with them that night, and it was the most deplorable scene I have ever seen. The suffering, the starvation, the agony depicted on their faces was beyond description. And the next morning, Joseph A. rides back to Devil's Gate, tells Captain Grant, get up, get moving, move east. And Captain Grant and the wagons and Joseph A. and the riders coming the other way meet at Greasewood Creek just by Independence Rock. And they bring them all into Independence, or all into Devil's Gate. And that's where the decision is made. We can't move on. The snow is too deep. The weather's too cold. The wind is brutal. And they move them up into Martin's Cove. And Captain Grant says, President Young has got to know how bad this is. He has to know what we're dealing with. And so he writes this very emotional letter to President Young. And guess who he hands it to? Joseph A. And Joseph A. and Abel Gar ride off again It's 327 miles from Fort Seminole, Devil's Gate, to the Salt Lake Valley. As he prepared to leave, Joseph A. put on 2 huge pairs of socks, thick socks, and wrapped his feet in buffalo hide shoes with the fur on, and made this comment: if my feet freeze now, they're going to have to stay frozen until I get to Salt Lake. They made that ride into the Salt Lake Valley, 327 miles, in 10 days on horseback. And once he arrived in the valley and told President Young, his dad, how bad it was, Joseph A. turned around and rode out again. This time to the top of Big Mountain, where he would spend the next several days digging a trail over Big Mountain. And when the wagons of the Hunt and Hodgett companies came up over Big Mountain, Joseph A. was there, digging out the trail. How deep was the snow? These covered wagons with the bows and the tarps over top, you could lay a stick across the divide and drive the wagons under the snow. It was that deep. That's how deep the trench was. That was Joseph A. Young. I wrote the story. I'll quote the last paragraph. The last immigrants did not arrive in the Salt Lake Valley until the 15th of December, 1856. Joseph A. had left the valley on October 7th. Quote, he just would not quit. Once he returned, Joseph A. Young was ordained an apostle by his father. He never sat in the Quorum of the 12, but he was ordained an apostle. In 1875, while serving as the first president of the Sevier, Utah stake, Joseph Angel Young passed away. He was only 40 years old. Historian Edward Tullidge described Joseph A. as, quote, endowed with splendid talents, gifted with the genius of statesmanship, and blessed with a magnanimous nature which made him worthy to be the leader of men, might faithfully, truthfully be written of the lamented Joseph A. Young. He just would not quit. Brothers and sisters, it's one thing to glorify pioneers. It's another matter entirely to learn what they were and what they did, and then go home and not be any different, not try any harder. I invite you to be like an Emily Hill, a Joseph A. Young. I don't know how else to say it. I was raised on a ranch. I was raised cowboy. You say it the way you mean it. It's time to toughen up. We need a little grit in this generation. We need to be able to handle whatever's coming because, as you've heard President Nelson say, all the easy things have been done. From here on out, it's going to be high adventure. Take your vitamins, hang on, he said. There's some tough stuff coming. I have no idea what it is. Let's not just use these as great stories on Pioneer Day. Let's be them. Jason, why don't you take a moment, if you would, please?
You want me to play or talk?
Whatever you want to do.
Well, I'm much more comfortable speaking. No, playing, actually. But I can hide behind the piano and just make things up, and it's good, and I don't have to get all emotional. Glenn, I get as involved, I think, as most people when they're hearing the stories, and it's a very unique thing with the music. I honestly don't know how to describe it other than somehow it just works. And some people call that spirit, some people call it, there's lots of things people call that, but there's definitely, if you try to feel it, there's a soundtrack to most things, I believe, in our life. And most of us aren't lucky enough to hear it, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to be able to hear that soundtrack. So hopefully when you hear the music, it just adds a little bit more of the spirit to what Glenn's sharing too. So everybody's doing well? Awesome. I haven't seen anybody nod off yet. So, so it's either my piano playing or... So he took the hard seat. I've got a soft seat there for him, and he wants the hard seat. I don't know how you're doing that after going on the cattle ride all a few days
Everything from here down is still numb.
That explains your bow-legged walking.
Yeah, that too. Yep. You ready to go
I'm
again?
ready to go for another one.
All right, let's do it again. And again, another quality. You've heard part of this story, and you've watched it in the movie. Let me tell you the rest of the story. And this is a generation with thin skin, easily offended. Hang on for this story, because it's going to make you uncomfortable. But that's necessary. Okay? We've heard the story, and we watched the movie. August 13th, 1856, public meeting, Florence, Nebraska, members of the Willie Handcart Company. Should they go forward, or should they make camp and stay the winter on the Missouri River? Levi was opposed to the camp moving forward. He was not the only one. Another of the sub-captains, Millen Atwood, expressed himself by saying that since he had been a member of this church with all of his experience, he had never been placed in a position where things appear so dark to him as it does to undertake to take this company through at this late season of the year. Well, the next night, which is now the night of August 13th, 1856, a public meeting was held. Captain James G. Willie stood up and admonished the saints in his company to exercise faith, to pray, to go through to the Salt Lake Valley and not be worried about a little thing like weather. The Almighty can temper the elements. He can do anything. Trust the Lord. Well, that was Captain Willie's speaking. He then invited Levi to speak, and Levi said, "If I speak, I must speak my mind, let it cut where it will." And Captain Willie said, "Certainly, do so." Levi then, I'm quoting Levi, "I then related to the saints the hardships that we should have to endure. I said that we were liable to have to wade through snow up to our knees and should at night wrap ourselves in a thin blanket and lie on the frozen ground without a bed. I spoke warmly upon the subject, but I spoke truth, and the people, judging from appearance and after expressions, felt the force of it." George Cunningham was in that meeting. He was 15 years old. Levi's speech had a profound impact on George. George said, quote, "As Levi spoke, the tears commenced to flow down his cheeks, and he prophesied that if we undertook such a journey at that late season of the year, our bones would strew the way." End of quote. Captain Willie then stood up and said, in effect, to Levi Savage, "You have no faith. You have no faith." He publicly rebuked him. And Levi said, "If you don't want me to serve as captain, say the word and I'm out. But I have spoken the truth." You see, what no one knew and no one comprehended is that Levi Savage had been part of the Mormon battalion. And by the chance of fate, Levi Savage had been in the mountains of the Sierra Nevadas in the summer of 1847 and had helped bury the remains of the Donner Party. He had seen what winter snows could do to a camp caught unprepared in the wrong place. And they voted him down. The company voted to go on. And it is reported that Levi Savage said, and I quote, listen to this, "Brethren and sisters, what I have said I know to be true. But seeing you are to go forward, I will go with you and will help you all I can. We'll work with you. We'll rest with you. We'll suffer with you. And if necessary, we'll die with you. May God in His mercy bless and preserve us. Amen." Now that's the story that everybody knows. Here's the rest of that story. The Willie Company left Florence, Nebraska, started across the Platte River Trail, and were out in the middle of Nebraska one night when a meeting was called. Franklin D. Richards of the Quorum of the 12 was there, along with several other church leaders. A meeting was called, and someone complained about Brother Savage to the leaders. And right in the middle of the meeting, Levi was called up and in front of everyone was dressed down. He was told to take back all of his opposition. They accused him of having no faith, of not supporting the brethren. You understand what I'm saying? And they told him that if he did not take back what he said, he would be tried for his membership. I told you this wasn't an easy story. Levi was forced to recant what he had said at Florence. Now, if that were me, okay, pardon me, but I speak my mind. I've had some bishops and church leaders in the past that were real knotheads. Okay? I swear sometimes they didn't have common sense. And they said things or did things that just made no sense to me. And I know that you're not supposed to speak against the brethren, and I'm not speaking against the brethren, but men are men and women are women, and we're all stupid sometimes. Is that comfortable enough for me to say? All right. I'll say it for you. You wouldn't dare. And if that had been me, and someone had treated me like that in a public church meeting, I would have forked a horse and rode back to the Missouri and said, "I'll see you on the other side." The reason I tell you the story is Levi's not me. He made a commitment and he would follow through. Neither Levi Savage nor Millen Atwood walked away. And everything Levi predicted would happen, happened. Lying on the ground without a bed, without a blanket, no clothes, no food, no shelter, and people dying every single day, their bones strewing the way when the wolves dug up the graves. Everything Levi said came to pass, and yet there is no record anywhere of him saying, "I told you so, I told you so." He never said that we have record of. More than 70 people in that company alone would die, just as Levi said. And yet, through all of that suffering and all of that difficulty, which was incalculable by today's standard, John Chislett said, quote, "Brother Savage was true to his word. No man worked harder than he to alleviate the suffering which he had foreseen when he had to endure it." William Woodward, another one of the captains, wrote a letter in 1907 to President Joseph F. Smith, and he said, quote, "Levi Savage, who was censured for his truthful statement at Florence, was, I think, the best help we had. Resolute and determined, his whole soul was for the salvation of our company." George Cunningham, again, who had observed Levi take his stand at Florence, later wrote that by the time the ordeal of the Willie Company was over, the captains of the Willie Company were, quote, completely exhausted and unable to walk. They had to be hauled the balance of the way into Salt Lake. They were James G. Willie, Millen Atwood, William Woodward, and Levi Savage. Now, brothers and sisters, pioneers then, pioneers now, Jim. This is the kind of ministers we are to be. We stand on their shoulders. I invite you with love. Don't give up. Keep going. Love and serve. And in this day and age when everybody's getting offended at the prophet Joseph or President Nelson and jumping ship over this or that thing, if you ever find yourself getting offended at the Lord and His leaders, you are on dangerous ground. Repent and come back. If Levi had gotten offended, history would have been altogether different. God bless the memory of men like Levi Savage and Millen Atwood. I think I have time for one more story. Are you okay? Do two more. Okay, I'll compromise. 1.5. There is one. There is one. I have it here, and I was debating whether I would share it or not. Some of you have heard me talk about it before, but I absolutely love this story. And again, it embodies what it means to be a pioneer, then or now. You ready, Jason?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Along the Overland Trail, and I was just out there on that trail just a couple of weeks ago through Nebraska. In the western part of Nebraska, there's a portion of the trail that leaves the Platte River, and you leave the source of water, and the trail goes up through what's called the Sand Hills of Nebraska. And it's one of the roughest parts of the Plains Trail because you have to go several miles, in fact, an entire day without fresh water, pulling a loaded handcart up the hill and then down the hill, but through blow sand. When we were on trek, we never pulled a handcart through blow sand. We pulled it through loose dust, but can you imagine pulling a several 100-pound cart through loose sand? That's tougher than trying to drag teenagers out of bed. Well, on that portion of the trail, the date was July 19th, 1857, the Christensen Pioneer Company. As they passed through those sand hills through that day without fresh water, the diary accounts said, and I quote, this comes out of the diary, contemporary diary, "The struggling efforts of human beings under such conditions are almost impossible to imagine. It was a severe strain upon the physical strength of the men and women who toiled almost to the point of exhaustion. Indeed," he said, "some of the immigrants were so overcome by the superhuman efforts required of them that they fell exhausted by the wayside and were unable to reach the camp at night. All day long, they had toiled without water. When the company finally reached the Wood River late that night. Several of the men who were still standing loaded up containers of water and went back up the trail to bring in those who could no longer walk. It took the better part of the night to get everyone into camp. Now, the reason I tell you the story is that there was one woman in that camp, Anna Marie Sorensen. After she arrived at the Wood River camp that night, after that day's ordeal and all that she had been through, quietly and unnoticed by everyone else, she walked out of the camp and went down into the cottonwood trees along the river. The following morning, Anna Marie walked out of the trees and walked over and picked up her handcart. In her apron was a brand new baby girl that she had given birth to that night. The diary quotes say this: "She had not murmured. Her courageous and devoted soul knew no obstacles to the goal of her ambition." I want us to be that determined. That determined. Nothing will stop us. Nothing will slow us down. Keep going, because I want to go right into the last story. Last story. Now, I was just on these grounds just a few days ago at Fort Laramie, Wyoming. Fort Laramie is a sacred and special place for me. Even though it's an abandoned United States Army base, it's one of the sites of one of the most unique spiritual experiences I've ever had. And part of it is because of this woman. Hannah Settle was born in Leeds, Yorkshire, England in 1834. In 1857, with her husband Joseph and her babe Laura Jane, she left England, coming to Zion. But they ran out of money. And so they wound up staying in Richmond, Virginia, where they worked to save up money to come across the plains and join the saints in Utah. Well, by early 1860, Hannah and Joseph are still in Virginia. Do you see a problem with that? Civil War. Exactly. Word comes from church leaders: get out, and get out now. So Hannah and Joseph pack up everything they've got and make their way to Florence, Nebraska, where they become a part of the 9th Handcart Company, the Daniel Robinson Handcart Company. Hannah would record in her journal, quote, "It was a dreadfully hard journey. And like the other companies, we suffered from a lack of food. Every handcart pioneer was hungry." Why? Because it is estimated that handcart pioneers burned upwards of 4,000 calories a day pulling that handcart. I can go on a 6-mile run and only burn 700. Well, by the time the Robinson Company reached Fort Laramie in Wyoming, everyone was so hungry they were resorting to eating tree bark. I'm not exaggerating. They actually ate tree bark to sustain themselves. Hannah decided that she would do anything to get some food. She left the company and walked over to the Fort Laramie trading post, carrying with her the most valuable material possessions she had left. She carried them all the way from England in a handcart. That's how much they meant to her. And this was part of her 17-pound allotment, and yet she was willing to give it up. She plopped it on the counter, a chest full of jewelry, and said, "What will you give me for that?" Now, somehow there's not a high demand for expensive jewelry on the plains of Wyoming. The trading post operator looked at her like, and as she said, she turned around, and standing behind her, she saw a man. I saw a very tall man, perhaps a trapper or a miner, dressed in a beaded buckskin suit, standing in the store. He eyed the jewelry, which I had in my hand, and finally said, "What do you want for that?" Meaning the jewelry. And Hannah said, "For a moment, I hesitated, and then the answer seemed to come to me by inspiration. 700 pounds of flour, sir." The man said, "Done." And she gave him the jewelry, and he bought 700 pounds of flour and gave it to her. She took that 700 pounds of flour and scattered it through the company and supported the 243 men, women, and children of the Robinson Handcart Company all the rest of the way across Wyoming until they reached supply wagons at Fort Bridger. She saved their lives. Now, Hannah would arrive in the Salt Lake Valley on the 27th of August, 1860. Something about that journey left a mark on Hannah's settle. She would never forget it. She would refer to herself and others as, quote, the Crusaders of the 19th century. She would tell the story of walking across the plains until her shoes wore out. And then she said, "When my shoes wore out, I got some Indian moccasins, and they were wet through many times." Wet. Not with water, but with blood. She concluded by saying, "We handcart people will never outlive the memory of those experiences." Hannah took it upon herself as a personal quest that the pioneers would never be forgotten. Never. When Hannah was now 75 years old, she gathered together a group of 50 women to her home, 381 4th Avenue in Salt Lake City, and formed them into a group determined never to forget the sacrifices of our pioneer ancestors. They would come to be called the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, whether you're at home or here in this audience with me, I invite you, in the name of Jesus Christ, I invite you. Don't forget them. Like Alma invited his people, don't forget the captivity of your fathers in the land of Nephi and in the land of Helam. I invite you, don't forget the struggles, the sacrifices, the faith and obedience of our fathers and mothers. Martin's Cove, Devil's Gate, Rocky Ridge, South Pass. Don't ever forget, and pass it on to the next generation. We are who we are because they were who they were and did what they did. And I so testify in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Well, was that fun? So hopefully you've really enjoyed this tonight. It's kind of a cool experience. The neat thing, I think everything went well with the broadcast, right, guys? I'm getting a thumbs up. Awesome. So if this is something people like, please put in the comments. If you're out there in Facebook land or YouTube land, put comments in there so we know if it sounded good, help us do better. But the more comments and things you guys do put on if you're watching from home, the more Facebook algorithms like it, and they'll help share this with a lot more people. And really our goal is just to share these stories with as many people as we can. I still remember when you first came to me, your comment was, I've never made money at this, but if you can help me share it with as many people as possible, that was the goal. And I think it's still the goal. And amazingly, it's reaching multiple tens of thousands of people every single Sunday morning. And even it's even reaching a whole lot of people that aren't of our faith, which is even more cool that we never expected.
Yeah,
So,
it's still a nonprofit venture, and that's true on many levels.
But the amazing thing is when Glenn came, I think you had about 200 or 300, maybe almost close to 300 stories that Carl Watkins, who'd done the Sounds of Sunday, had kind of organized in. It was semi-organized, but if anybody wanted to ever search, including Glenn, you couldn't. There was no way to actually type in, a word or a story. And a lot of the funding that we've been able to bring in, we've actually compiled a database that I think we're over 1,200 stories now in that VIP database, which is incredible. And you can, if you're a VIP and you don't know how to use that, please either send us an email. There's some links and we've recorded to help people be able to find those stories, but share them, please. If you've got friends, family, you're giving a talk in church, or that's what they're for. The same is true with the books that we're doing. We're just about ready to do the 4th year book, 4 years straight now of 52 stories. We've not missed a week, even for COVID. So it's been incredible to share those stories. If I was picking a favorite, I think the mission story book is my absolute favorite one that has every mission story that Glenn had kind of told over the years in one spot. And it just makes me happy when I find out that for priest quorum or teachers or seminary classes I've found, they'll get up and they'll have the kids read a 3 or 4 minute story about one of these mission stories. And that's cool. So, well, thank you. I'm just along for the ride. But this is fun for me, being able to be here and share the piano and be able to add a soundtrack to some of the stories. And hopefully it, comes through when we put those two together. And then when Vlad in Serbia is doing the video side, and there's multiple people, it's just cool that we can do that. So thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Ellis Burrell. I'm from Martinsburg, Idaho. I'm a VIP member, like a lot of you. Okay, I understand the support for your program comes from us as VIPs through the sales from the books. And I don't know what else I've left off. But I heard you talking about, paying for programs out in the Philippines and other areas that you're trying to reach. Does history of the saints or Glenn Rawson stories have any type of foundation or something that someone could contribute to for the cause without buying books? Or
Well, the VIP membership is what funds all of that support out there. We don't have a foundation, a nonprofit thing or anything like that to contribute. Everything you give us, we try to give you something in return, but we haven't sought donations at all. That's what the VIP thing is the way to fund all this. That's my take, Jason.
Yeah, and what's crazy is so Glenn is not the most organized person. I love you, but
Amen.
we've had help from Diana and Kristen and Julie and my mother, and just the numbers, I can keep counting the number of people that have helped us. But in order to organize all 1,200, there's more than 1,200 stories now. We're upwards of over 2,000 hours of time, and we've got this searchable database that never would have existed had we not been able to. And I think it's something, whether Glenn don't get hit by a bus, but if that were to happen tomorrow, this is something that can live on and continue to bless a lot of people. And I think, that's your goal. Don't get hit by getting hit by a bus is not the goal, but it's something that we want it to carry on and have generations be able to benefit from it as well.
Yeah, and so I appreciate your question, but we're not soliciting any donations, but if there's anybody out there that's not a VIP, that's how you help. or just buy a book or buy a lot of books. In fact, Jason wanted me to mention that any books that are back there that you don't have, it's a flat $15 for any book that you want. So I don't know if you already said
No,
that.
I didn't. But if anybody plays piano, I give you a heck of a deal too on the piano books. But that's not why we were here. We wanted to bring you here to say thank you, and give just a glimpse of what your support has done. And there's probably 15 times what you see here of people that weren't able to be here tonight. And so please come to the next one, or if you want to come to concerts, we do some really neat. You're traveling too much, but I'm doing. I know we don't know the exact dates, but Alex Sharp from Celtic Women. Has anybody heard of the Celtic Women group? A few of you. So Alex is a friend of mine. We did an album. There's actually a picture of her up on the wall up there on one of the CDs. But the gal that's the lead singer on Riverdance and one of the lead Celtic Women people, and Alex, who was in Celtic Women, sang all of my hymns. And we put it with the orchestra. And my orchestrator his name's Chuck Myers, but he's been the guy behind the Piano Guys, a lot of their stuff. He was also the lead composer on the new Harry Potter video game. And he also did a lot of Disney stuff. So we joke that he stunt doubles for the video game since they don't want to pay money for the movies. But he's the guy that's doing the orchestra behind what we're doing. And we're going to be having her come in October to probably do 1 or 2 concerts here. And so it'll be this size a group again. I don't know whether we'll do dinner or maybe just dessert sometime, but if you want to you never could go to a Celtic Women concert without several thousand people in the audience. And she's going to be sitting right here singing, and it's going to be out of this world. If you're up in the Logan area, she's going to be doing some concerts up at the ski resort up there too. Please, you'll get emails now from us when we have things coming up, but tell friends and family about it. If you know people who aren't signed up for the free stories from Glenn, just go on to glennrawsonstories.com. You can click the button and make sure you don't spam them and surprise them like, who's this Glenn Rawson guy sending me stories every week? But we would love for your help. If we had every VIP person share with 2 people, we'd add about 2,000-3,000 new people to get the free stories. And maybe a few of them want to be VIPs too, but we really just want to share stories with people. And if it grows some testimonies and helps even just a little bit, it was worth it.
I think it might be worth saying this just one last time. I was a missionary a long time ago. Maybe not as long as some of you, but a long time ago. And I never came home from my mission. I never, for some reason, never came home from my mission. And like Jason said, when we started this venture with the stories, it was not to make a lot of money. It was to take the stories and share them with people around the world. Not because me and those stories, but because those stories came from people like you. In fact, as I alluded to, some of them are your stories, your ancestors. And those stories need to be told. And I have discovered, in fact, I got the comment earlier tonight, that those stories are reaching out to those who are either not members of the church or who are less active. And they're doing a good thing, not because of me, but because of the power of the stories themselves. And so this is an extension of missionary work. This is an extension of ministry. And so once again, I thank you for being here. I love you. And I would invite you to have safe travel going home. Yes, Jean?
What was the name of Hannah's last name?
Hannah Settle Lapish. Lapish. That story, in fact, all those stories are in the database. A lot of times when I go looking for a story, I have to call Kristen and say, did I tell that story? Where can I find it? And Kristen finds it for me.
She has the coolest spreadsheet now that we can go in and we can even tell you when the fireside was that he told the story.
Yeah, and I don't have any idea. Any other questions before we kick you out tonight?
I have cards for the catering people if you're interested or needing anything like that.
Okay. Oh, and I will say, we're not on the air anymore, are we, Tim? Oh, I still am? Oh, boy. I will say this to all of you. You know, remember a few months ago, I told you if you have stories about prayer, well, that book is right there. It's so close. But again, if you have any stories of the nature, especially pioneer stories like we've talked about tonight, send them to me. Email them to me or Kristen. I would love to have them, okay? The next generation of stories would come from you. All right, that's enough. We've talked enough. Bless you out there. See you next week. Okay?
Thank you.